Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is MedClinch Academy. Today you are going to look or to continue to a series of hypertension and antihypertensive. So if you are new to our channel, please first step subscribe, like, and share the link to our videos. And if it's your first time, please ensure that you watch our previous episodes so that you can catch up to where we are. For those guys who have been watching, we are going to continue from where we left. So from this point up to this point, I believe it has been a long journey. And let me just point a few things. On our first episode, we looked on hypertension on its own as a topic. We defined the meaning of hypertension and also looked on the types of hypertension, both the primary and secondary hypertension. We also looked on how we can grade hypertension. After that, we looked on various parameters that are used to define hypertension or that will help us understand hypertension, the likes of cardiac output, the systemic vascular resistance, the total peripheral resistance, the likes of the stroke volume, the end diastolic volume, the end systolic volume, the preload, and the afterload. So if you don't understand these basic terms, please ensure that you check our first episode. After our first episode, we went on our second episode where we looked on drugs that go against our sympathetic drive. Remember, sympathetic nervous system is one of the mechanism under which we results in high blood pressure. So we have drugs that go against the sympathetic drive, the sympatholytics, or the sympathetic antagonist. If you haven't watched that, please ensure you watch. After the sympatholytics, we also looked on the drugs that go under RAS system. RAS is the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So we looked on the drugs that go against that system in our third episode. So if you haven't watched, please go and watch it. Then last time that we met, we looked on diuretics as a topic on its own and how it can be used to also manage blood pressure. So our topic on diuretic was somehow long, almost 2 hours, because I not only explained diuretics as a mechanism, as a drug they used in managing blood pressure, but also I taught diuretics as a topic on its own, so that if you're taught diuretics, you can just go and watch that episode on its own. So please, if you haven't watched those 4 episodes, go back, watch the episode, and then join our class. So before we begin, I hope you guys are well. Please take a notebook and a pen somewhere quiet so that we can digest or reach an understanding on how this topic will help us in understanding other drugs that are used in managing hypertension. So that being said, let's begin. So today we are going to look on a drugs called vasodilators. I believe by now you understand the term vasodilators. Vaso can mean vessel. Dilators mean dilation. Yeah. So dilator, like increasing a circumference. Yeah, increasing an area of a vessel. Yeah. So vasodilators, vasodilation. So an increase in the circumference of the vessel. So that's what you call vasodilators. So that being said, remember this MedClinch Academy, this forum, it's wide. It's also on a Twitter, TikTok, IG. So you can share our link, join our channels so that we can be able to interact when it comes to medical education. So let's begin. So a brief intro before we begin looking at the drugs that act as vasodilators. First of all, we have to understand the physiology of vasodilation and vasoconstriction, because once you understand the physiology, then it becomes easier for you to understand the mechanism of action of these drugs. Remember, our aim is vasodilation. So by understanding the physiology of vasoconstriction, we know that the drugs that go against vasoconstriction help in vasodilation, or the drugs that support vasodilation help us in decreasing the blood pressure. So it's crucial for us to understand the physiology first. So once we understand the physiology, it will be easy for us to understand how these drugs work. So let's begin. So an intro. So vasodilators constitute a pharmacologically diverse group of drugs that lower blood pressure by relaxing vascular smooth muscles, resulting in dilation of arterioles, veins, or both. So we have got drugs. Okay, we have got blood. All of us know that I've got blood vessels. the three major ones. You've got the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. There's some drugs that really work on dilating the arteries, while others work on dilating the veins, and others work on both. So we're going to look on the drugs that work on dilating the arteries, those that work in dilating the veins, and those that work by dilating both. Yeah. So the primary effect is a reduction in. Let's now look. First one, I'm going to look on those drugs that are effective when it comes to arterial vasodilation. So we're going to look on arterial vasodilators. So to start with, one thing that you have to know, I believe in our first topic or in our first episode, we looked on the formula of blood pressure, and we said that blood pressure equals cardiac output multiplied by the total peripheral resistance or systemic vascular resistance. So BP equals cardiac output times SVR. Now, one thing that you have to know is that by vasodilation tends to decrease the systemic vascular resistance. And if you decrease the systemic vascular resistance, it means there will be a reduction in the blood pressure provided that the cardiac output remains constant. So arterial vasodilation leads to a decrease in systemic vascular resistance. So don't forget that, or TPR, same thing. So arterial vasodilation leads to a reduction in systemic vascular resistance and a decrease in systemic vascular resistance, provided that the cardiac output remains constant, will automatically lead to a decrease in blood pressure. So that's something that you have to remember. And we all know on the same episode, on our first episode, I also explained the meaning of afterload. Afterload is the resistance against which the heart pumps. So it means if there is an increase in systemic vascular resistance, there will be an increase in the afterload. So afterload can be used interchangeably with systemic vascular resistance. Yeah. So an increase in SVR leads to an increase in the afterload. So a decrease in SVR will lead to a decrease in the afterload. So that's something that you have to know. So these two terms can be used interchangeably because afterload is a mechanism under which the heart pumps against the resistance. So arterial vasodilators also reduce the resistance against which the heart pumps. The resistance. So these terms can be used interchangeably. So all in all, we know that we can just say that arterial vasodilators decrease our afterload, and they also decrease our SVR, and they decrease our BP. So that's what you can understand from this slide. So this is what I'm trying to say. Our BP equals our cardiac output times the SVR. So if our cardiac output remains constant, a decrease in the systemic vascular resistance or a decrease in the afterload will automatically cause a decrease in the blood pressure. So this is something that you have to understand as a student, is that those drugs that cause arterial vasodilation will lead to a decrease in the SVR and a decrease in blood pressure. So let's continue. So just ignore my arrows. So our second point. So let's look on the drugs that dilate our veins. So what about vasodilators? Now, our first point here, as you can read, vasodilators, they work by increasing the storage capacity of the veins, which lowers the amount of blood returning to the heart. So unlike the arterial dilators, if you dilate the veins, basically it means that you are increasing the capacity of the veins to store blood. Yeah. So the blood will be somehow static as you dilate the veins. And that being said, also it tends to reduce the amount of blood moving towards the heart. So if you dilate the veins, basically it means you're going to return the amount of blood returning to the heart. You're going to reduce the amount of blood returning to the heart. In short, you're going to decrease or to reduce the venous return. You're going to reduce the venous return. Now, so reduction in the venous return also leads in a reduction of the preload. I remember in the first episode, I told you guys that preload, what's the meaning of preload? Preload is the amount of stretch that the left ventricle or the ventricles make to accommodate blood. Yeah. So if this a reduction in the venous return, it means the ventricles won't stretch further. So it means there will be a decrease in the preload. So because more blood stays in the dilated veins, there is naturally less blood flowing into the right atrium, and this is a reduction in the venous return. So if you dilate the veins, basically you're going to reduce the amount of blood that is returning to the heart. And on the other hand, if you constrict the veins, you are going to increase the amount of blood that is returning to the heart. Remember, veins always return blood to the heart. That's something that you have to remember. So a reduction, so venodilation or venodilators, basically they will affect the preload, and we know the preload tends to have an impact on the end diastolic volume, because remember the preload is the amount of stretch that the ventricles make to accommodate the blood. Yeah. So basically, that being said, it means that preload tends to influence our EDV. EDV, this means our end diastolic volume. And if you impact the EDV, you are going to impact the stroke volume. Remember the formula of stroke volume. Stroke volume equals to the end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. So if you impact the EDV, you're going to impact our stroke volume. And remember, our stroke volume also impacts our cardiac output. In our first episode, I said that the cardiac output equals the stroke volume multiplied by the heart rate. So if the heart rate remains constant and you impact the stroke volume, you're going to impact our cardiac output. And lastly, we know that BP equals to the cardiac output multiplied by SVR. So if you impact our cardiac output, you are going to impact our BP. So that being said, because you are speaking on vasodilators, what happens? Vasodilators, they always decrease the preload. So if you decrease the preload, if you decrease the amount of stretch that the ventricle has to make, it basically means the EDV will automatically reduce. There will be the end diastolic volume will reduce. And when the end diastolic volume reduces, remember our formula: stroke volume equals to the end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. So if you decrease the EDV, a decrease in the EDV will lead to a decrease in the stroke volume. So our stroke volume will decrease. So when the stroke volume decreases, remember in our first episode, the formula of the cardiac output equals to the stroke volume multiplied by the heart rate. So it means if you decrease the stroke volume and the heart rate remains constant, we are going to decrease our cardiac output. And if you decrease our cardiac output, from our first episode, blood pressure equals to the cardiac output multiplied by the systemic vascular resistance. So if you decrease our cardiac output, we are going to decrease our blood pressure. So that's how this mechanism works. So in venodilators, it's all about the preload. In arterial dilators, it's all about the systemic vascular resistance and the afterload. So arterial dilators afterload, venodilators preload. So that's something that you can relate with. So let's continue with our intro. Now, there are other drugs that work both, that can dilate the veins and the arteries, and these drugs are called mixed vasodilators. Just to mention these drugs, the first one is sodium nitroprusside. Sodium nitroprusside is a very good mixed vasodilator, and also we have got nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin, are going to see how it can work as a mixed vasodilator. But for now, let's just continue the explanation. Now, there's some drugs that can act as mixed vasodilators. This means that they can impact the afterload and they can also impact the preload, yeah, through two mechanisms. So they decrease both the amount of blood returning to the heart. So in this point here, we know that this one is this happens through venodilation, because if you venodilate, you're going to decrease the amount of blood returning to the heart. Apart from this also, they also decrease the structural resistance the heart must pump against. So we all know this is the afterload. So these drugs, number one, they decrease the venous return, or they decrease the preload, and also they decrease the afterload. Yeah. So these drugs can be called mixed vasodilators. We're going to look on example of drugs that act as mixed vasodilators. So one thing that you have to know, so these drugs serve as a dual pathway. They really do or help in the preload reduction through venodilation, and they can also lead to afterload reduction through arterial dilation. So that's something that you can remind yourself on. So these drugs are very good when it comes to being used in hypertensive emergencies. That's what I've said. This one common drug called sodium nitroprusside that is very good mixed vasodilator. But you're going to look on how it works, how it looks like, and the mechanism of action under which it is involved. So that being said, you're going to look on two pathways. So I want you guys to be fresh. You can stretch, be alert, because now you want now to want to peruse. We want to digest the two pathways that you have to understand. So these two pathways, number one, they lead to arterial vasoconstriction, and also they lead to arterial vasodilation. So we're going to look on physiology of vasoconstriction and the physiology of vasodilation. Now, for vasoconstriction, we're going to look how it happens, the electrolytes involved, the enzymes involved, and we're also going to do the same for the vasodilation pathway, whereby we have got the nitric oxide and the CGMP pathway. Remember, this is MedClinch Academy. Like, subscribe, and share. Now, let's us begin. Now, arterial vasoconstriction is the physiological process whereby vascular smooth muscles contract. Yeah. I've explained this in my previous slide. Yeah, if you vasoconstrict the arteries, what's going to happen? When you narrow the arteries, it means you're going to increase the peripheral vascular resistance, and if you increase the peripheral vascular resistance or the systemic vascular resistance, you're going to elevate the blood pressure. Now, so the degree of arterial tone is determined by balance between. So everything happens through two pathways. I'm going to mention the two pathways now. Both the arterial tone or the venular tone, whichever the way. So all the vascular tone, this happens through a balance under two mechanisms. So this is how these two work. This one pathway that leads to constriction or vasoconstriction, and this pathway it's always calcium dependent contraction. So the vasoconstriction pathway depends on calcium. Yeah, dependent on the is dependent on the calcium. That's why you've got drugs called calcium channel blockers. I'm going to explain further how it works. And the vasodilation pathway, basically it involves the nitric oxide. That's why you've got the nitric oxide, the NO donors. We're going to explain how also that works. But remember, both the arterial tone and the venular tone, they may use both pathways. So I want you guys to be very alert, because now the hack of this topic, if you want to hack this topic, you have to understand these two pathways. Once you have the physiology of these two pathways, it will become easy for you to understand how these drugs work. It will be very easy. This topic will be very easy for you to understand or to digest. Once you understand these two pathways, it will become very easy for you guys to understand everything. Now let's continue. Now, this is where work begins. I believe you guys can see the screen. I know that it looks tiny. You can just zoom with your phone, because in the long run, this is a video. I don't think it will have an impact in any way for you guys to understand what I'm going to say. Now, let me just take my marker pen here. It's ready. Yeah, good. Now, let's begin. Now, in this screen of mine, you can see two sides. Yeah, this one side is in brown color. This side here, this side is called the vasoconstriction pathway. You can see this side here, this one. This is called the vasoconstrictor pathway. This one helps in contraction, vasoconstriction. So this pathway here is the pathway that helps in vasoconstriction. And this pathway here is the pathway that helps in the vasodilation. So I hope you guys will be alert. So one side helps in vasoconstriction, and the other side helps in dilation or vasodilation. So that being said, it means that if our aim is to reduce blood pressure, our aim is to reduce the peripheral vascular resistance, or our aim is to promote or to reduce the venous return. Now, what happens? We have to go against this pathway. So the vasoconstrictor pathway is our enemy, because remember, vasoconstriction always increase our systemic vascular resistance, and it always increase our afterload and our blood pressure. So vasoconstrictor pathway is our enemy. So we are going to block. You want to block this pathway. This pathway is our enemy. On the other hand, the vasodilation pathway, the NO, the NO pathway, nitric oxide, CGMP, cyclic GMP pathway, it's our friend. We want to promote vasodilation, because remember, vasodilation reduces the systemic vascular resistance, it reduces the afterload, it reduces the venous return. So this is our friend. So in short, we want to promote this pathway, and we want to go against this pathway. So I believe till there we are together. And now there are some key terms, there's some key points here, down here. Our key, at your own free time, you can just look into it. But let me now just explain the pathway quickly so that you can move to our next slide. Now, what happens? Let's begin with our constriction pathway. So before there's a vasoconstriction, there's always a stimulus, or let me say a stimuli. So stimulus may be via a hormone like norepinephrine. Remember, in our sympathetic drive, it can be through angiotensin 2, through vasopressin, through endothelin, through this stimulus. It can be any stimulus. There's some stimuli that always promote vasoconstriction. I believe by now you know these stimulus, because you have discussed in our previous episodes some of the mechanism under which blood pressure increases. We know the sympathetic drive tends to do that. We know our angiotensin 2 does that. We know our vasopressin, like the ADH, also causes vasoconstriction. We know that the endothelin, there's all those stimulus. That's where our vasoconstriction happen. Now, on our previous episodes, we looked on how you can block the stimulus. So on a previous episode, what you were doing, you were just going, we were blocking the stimulus. We were blocking the norepinephrine from attaching itself. We were blocking the angiotensin 2 and the rest. But for now, we're not going to look at the intrinsic mechanism under which we can influence the vasoconstriction. Now, so this stimuli, they will bind into a receptor. So they will bind to a receptor. So we've got a G, receptor activation. So once they bind on the receptor, what happens? So when that happens, when the stimuli binds to the receptor, there will be an activation of phospholipase C. So this is a phospholipase C. So this enzyme here, phospholipase C, it's our enzyme. Now, what will happen? So when there's an activation of phospholipase C will act on the phospholipid here and lead to the production of two main products. Our first product here is the IP3 and the DAG. So our IP3 basically stands for inositol 1,4,5 triphosphate. So we began by our stimulus. Our stimulus, they bind to the receptor, and this leads to an activation of the phospholipase C. Phospholipase C will act, or it will lead to it will act on the phospholipid layer to produce two products, the IP3 and the DAG. So I want to focus on the IP3. IP3 is also called inositol 1,4,5 triphosphate. So our IP3 will lead to, number one, it will lead to the production or the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So our IP3 leads to a release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So there will be an increase of calcium, and not only that, we all know that apart from that happening, when there's an increase of calcium, we know that there will be an elevation of positive charge inside the cell. So the increase of positive charge will lead to depolarization, and when there's depolarization, we always have some channels called the L-type calcium channels, and these channels are voltage gated. Yeah, they only open when there's an increase of depolarization. So membrane depolarization will open the L-type calcium channels, and this will lead to an influx of calcium inside the cell. So calcium will drive into the cell. So the influx of calcium via the L-type calcium channels and the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum will lead to an elevation of calcium. So we've got an increased calcium. There's an increase in calcium, yeah? So what happens next? So when there's an increase in calcium, the calcium will form a complex called the calcium calmodulin complex. So this calcium there'll be an elevation of calcium will lead to a complex called the calcium calmodulin complex. So this complex leads to the activation of the MLCK. Yeah, the calcium calmodulin complex activates the myosin light chain kinase. So there will be an activation of the MLCK, the myosin light chain kinase. And the myosin light chain kinase acts as a contraction switch. How does this happen? So the myosin light chain kinase acts as a contraction switch. How does that happen? It happens because this MLCK, the myosin light chain kinase, it leads to myosin phosphorylation. It leads to myosin phosphorylation, yeah, and myosin phosphorylation, it will enable the myosin head to interact with the actin filament, and this will lead to smooth muscle contraction. That's why I believe you guys were taught muscular contraction in physiology classes. So when the myosin heads interacts with the actin filament, it leads to smooth muscle contraction, and smooth muscle contraction will lead to via hemodynamic consequences, it will decrease the radius, to decrease the radius, and when there's a decrease in radius, it will increase the peripheral resistance, and the increased peripheral resistance will lead to an increase blood pressure. So that's what happens. So it all begins with the stimuli they bind to the receptor, and once that happens, there will be an activation of the phospholipase C. Phospholipase C will lead to the production of inositol triphosphate and AG. The inositol triphosphate leads to an elevation of calcium in the cell. How? By opening the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium, and also promoting the opening of L-type calcium channels via the increase of depolarization. And when that happens, an increase in calcium channel will lead to the formation of calcium calmodulin complex, which will activate the myosin light chain kinase. The myosin light chain kinase will lead to myosin phosphorylation, which acts as a contraction switch, whereby the myosin head will be in touch with the actin filaments, leading to smooth muscle contraction. So this process leads to vasoconstriction. So the drugs, so if our aim is to decrease blood pressure, we want to work against this mechanism. That's why we have got the likes of calcium channel blockers. I'm going to explain how that happens. Next, we have another mechanism that leads to dilation, and this happens through nitric oxide. So nitric oxide can be produced from the endothelium, but also there are some drugs that donate the nitric oxide. Now, what happens when the nitric oxide is produced? Let me just take my pen. I don't know if I can take a blue pen. Let me take a blue from this here. So good. So a production of nitric oxide occurs. So when this nitric oxide production, what happens? The nitric oxide, what it does, it activates the soluble guanylyl cyclase. So this uh, enzyme here is activated. So nitric oxide will activate soluble guanylyl cyclase. So when that happens, there will be formation of cyclic GMP. So cyclic G, how does this happen? Cyclic GMP is formed from the GTP, guanine triphosphate. So the guanine triphosphate is converted to cyclic GMP. So cyclic GMP what? So what does what happens next? So once we have our cyclic GMP, activates our protein kinase G. So this here is our culprit here, protein kinase G. So all in all, we want to form this molecule here. So once we have our protein kinase G, this is what plays this protein kinase G plays various roles in decreasing the blood pressure. How? The first step here is that it inhibits calcium release. It inhibits calcium release. It inhibits calcium release from the by decreasing the IP3 mediated calcium release. So it goes against the inositol triphosphate. Yeah, and when that happens, it reduces calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So there will be a decrease of calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Number two, it also closes. So what happens before that? It opens the potassium channel. It opens the sensitive potassium channels. When the potassium channels are opened, potassium will flow out. There will be potassium efflux. Yeah, potassium will leave the cell, and when potassium leave the vascular smooth muscle cell, what happens? There will be a hyperpolarization, and membrane hyperpolarization will lead to a closure of L-type, a voltage L-type calcium channels. So PKG number one, it inhibits calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Number two, it opens the ATP potassium channel, and when ATP potassium channels are opened, there will be potassium efflux, and potassium efflux leads to membrane hyperpolarization. Membrane hyperpolarization will lead to the closure of calcium channels, of the voltage L-type calcium channels, and when these channels close, there will be a decreased calcium entry. Yeah, so in short, there will be a decreased intracellular calcium level. So I believe that's understood. So when all this happens, there will be an activation of myosin light chain phosphatase, MLCP. There will be an activation of myosin light chain phosphatase, and myosin light chain phosphatase, it dephosphorylates the myosin. So you have to compare the two. Let me just take my pointer. Now here you have to note we've got myosin light chain phosphatase. Myosin light chain phosphatase, it dephosphorylates myosin, unlike the myosin light chain kinase, which phosphorylates the myosin. So you have got two differences here. So what happens? So when the dephosphorylation happens, when there's the dephosphorylation of myosin, this acts as a relaxation switch. So MLCP, or myosin light chain phosphatase, will promote myosin dephosphorylation, which will prevent the actin myosin interaction, and this will lead to smooth muscle relaxation, as you can see. So there will be a smooth muscle relaxation. There will be an increase in radius. An increase in radius reduces the peripheral resistance, and in turn reduces the blood pressure. So that's something that you can understand from this slides. So for those guys who haven't understood, I'm going to explain in detail in our next slide how both occurs. So this pathway here promotes vasoconstriction. This here promotes vasodilation. This here is calcium dependent. Yeah, it depends on calcium to cause vasoconstriction. This here is nitric oxide dependent. It depends on nitric oxide to cause vasodilation. So let's begin looking at the vasoconstrictor pathway, the first pathway. So I've said the first, it begins with the stimulus. So we have to have a stimulus. So arterial vasoconstriction occurs when vasoconstrictors such as norepinephrine, angiotensin II, vasopressin, and endothelin bind to GQ coupled receptors on vascular smooth muscle. So first step, stimulus have to bind on the receptors, on the G coupled receptors. So when that happens, what happens? There will be an activation of phospholipase C. So this activates phospholipase C, which converts membrane phospholipid into inositol triphosphate, the IP3 and the DAG. But I want to focus on IP3 because IP3 is the one that is hugely involved in causing vasoconstriction. So we'll have the formation of IP3. So IP3 is our culprit. So once we form IP3, what happens? So IP3 will mediate calcium release in various mechanisms. The first one is it will stimulate the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum will release calcium. And when that happens, remember, there will be an increase in positive charge. Automatically, there will be a depolarization that happens, and a depolarization or membrane depolarization opens the voltage-gated L-type calcium channels. So this channel, this L-type calcium channel will open, and when they open, there will be an influx of calcium into the vascular smooth muscle cell. So when membrane depolarization opens L-type calcium channels, allowing additional calcium to flow. So there'll be an extra calcium coming inside. So from these 4 lines, number 1, there are 2 things that you have to note. Is that IP3, number 1, is the major culprit that leads to release of calcium from sarcoplasmic reticulum and also leads to calcium influx in the cell. So when that happens next, now an increase in calcium in the cell will lead to a formation of a complex called calcium calmodulin activation. So the rise in calcium forms a calcium calmodulin complex. Yeah. So when this complex is formed, this complex will activate our contraction switch called the myosin light chain kinase. So there's 2 switch. There's myosin light chain kinase. So kinase leads to phosphorylation of myosin. And also you have the myosin light chain phosphatase, which leads to dephosphorylation. So that you have to understand later. So calcium calmodulin complex activates myosin light chain kinase, leading to myosin phosphorylation. This lead to actin myosin cross bridge formation, and also finally lead to smooth muscle contraction. And we know if there's a smooth muscle contraction, this will result into an increase in the total peripheral resistance, and an increase in TPR will lead to an increase in blood pressure. So that's something that I have to note. So that's all about the vasoconstrictor. By the way, all this is this is calcium dependent. So remember, when discussing antihypertensive drugs, we want to promote vasodilation, and one way is to go against vasoconstrictor. So for us to decrease our blood pressure, we have to go against this pathway. We have to counteract this pathway. So that's something that you have to remember. Now let's go to another pathway. This is called a vasodilator pathway. Now this one here depends on nitric oxide. So NO cyclic GMP mediated relaxation. So the first step here, we always have a production of nitric oxide, which can happen either in the endothelium, or there are other drugs that are nitric oxide donors, that they just donate the nitric oxide. Yeah. So once we have our nitric oxide, what happens? Our nitric oxide, what it does, is that it activates our soluble guanylyl cyclase. It activates soluble guanylyl cyclase, the SGC. So when soluble guanylyl cyclase is activated, the SGC will convert the GTP to cyclic GMP. So there will be a conversion of guanine triphosphate to cyclic GMP, the cyclic guanine monophosphate. So the cyclic GMP, now what happens? The cyclic GMP, this one here, will lead to the activation of protein kinase G. So this is what we want to have, an increase in protein kinase G. So once we have, so I've explained this one, an increased CGMP activates protein kinase G, major mediator of vascular smooth muscle. So the protein kinase G is our major mediator. Just like our IP3 was our major mediator in vasoconstriction, here our PKG is our major mediator when it comes to vascular smooth muscle relaxation. So what happens? So the PKG mediated relaxation mechanism. So PKG promotes vasodilation by, number 1, it inhibits IP3 mediated calcium release. It will stop IP3 from promoting calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Number 2 is that not only that, it will open ATP sensitive potassium channels to polarize the cell. Remember, if you have got an efflux of potassium, if potassium leaves the cell, there will be hyperpolarization. And when this happens, what happens? There's this gate which depend on the polarization. So when there is hyperpolarization, it means the voltage gated L-type calcium channels will be closed. And when they're closed, there will be no calcium entry. So there will be a reduction in the calcium entry. And when there's a reduction in calcium entry, so there will be a decreased intracellular calcium. And when there's a decreased intracellular calcium, that leads to an activation of the myosin light chain phosphatase. So our myosin light chain phosphatase, this one here, dephosphorylates our myosin. Yeah, this one here dephosphorylates our myosin. So this leads to myosin dephosphorylation. And when there's myosin dephosphorylation, it means that this will prevent the interaction of the actin and myosin. And when that happens, it leads to smooth muscle relaxation. So it leads to smooth muscle relaxation, which leads to arterial vasodilation, decreased peripheral resistance, and reduced blood pressure. So that's how it happens. So the two pathways can happen both in arterial smooth muscles or in venular smooth muscle. But there are things that you have to note when it comes to the two. Remember, you've got smooth muscle cell, the arterial smooth muscle cell, and the venular smooth muscle cell. But there's some things that you have to note, because when it comes, there are other drugs that are very good vasodilators, and others that are very good arterial dilators, and others that work on both. So let's look on how this happens. Now, when it comes to baseline tone is that in arterial smooth muscle cell, there's a high intrinsic myogenic tone, very active. There's an intrinsic myogenic tone. And in venular, there's a low intrinsic tone, which heavily depends on the sympathetic nerve input. So this one tends to depend on an outward stimuli to stimulate its contraction. Then, when it comes to calcium channel, the L-type calcium channels, in arterial smooth muscles, there's high density primary source of contractile calcium, and here there's low density, so they rarely open during routine resting state. You also have the response to CCB. The arterial smooth muscle, they tend to respond well when it comes to calcium channel blockers. So it causes profound vasodilation, because the calcium channel blockers, as we shall explain later, leads to it blocks the L-type calcium channels. While here, the calcium channel blockers, they don't have any response when it comes to venular smooth muscle cell. Yeah. So when it comes to endothelial nitric oxide release, there's continuous production in the arterial smooth muscles, and here it's a low baseline production, so it creates high sensitivity to outside nitric oxide. So an outward nitric oxide tends to stimulate venodilation more than it does to arterial dilation. So response to nitrates. So nitrates tends to respond moderately when it comes to arterial smooth muscle cell, while they respond very well when it comes to venous or venodilation. So that's something that I have to note. So in short, in this table, let me just make it simple for you guys. It means that the nitrates, there's some drugs called the nitrates, I'm going to look later. The nitrates, they are very good when it comes to venodilation. They're very good venodilators, whereas the CCBs are very good arterial dilators. So that's something that you have to note from this slide. Now, that being said, now let's go to the pharmacology section, the classification of vasodilators. Now, how do you classify the vasodilators? So, vasodilators, they are very good antihypertensives. Antihypertensives. Why? Because number one, if they dilate the arterioles, that will lead to a decrease in the TPR, and we know a decrease in the TPR or SVR will lead to a decrease in the blood pressure. Apart from that, also they dilate our veins, and you know when that happens, they will decrease the preload, and in turn decrease the stroke volume, cardiac output, and the blood pressure. So some of the classification I've got: number one, direct arterial vasodilators. Number two, we have dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers. So in calcium channel blockers, I've got two groups, but I've decided to be more specific, because for this one we have to specify dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers. So if you're told to classify vasodilators, when it comes to CCBs, I want you to be more specific. Try to add the hydropyridine calcium channel blockers. We also have got the nitrates or the nitric oxide donors. I've explained this one. They just distribute the nitric oxide. And also we've got the potassium channel openers. We know that potassium channel openers also play a key role when it comes to dilating the vessels. And also the alpha-1 adrenoceptor blockers. This one we did in our second episode when we looked at drugs that go against the sympathetic drive. So this one here, it goes against the stimulus and the receptor. So here, this one here, I'm not going to tackle in this session because I tackled in our second episode. That being said, let's begin with our first category or first class of drugs. The first one, these ones are called the direct arterial vasodilators. Now, direct arterial vasodilators are a class of antihypertensive drugs that act directly on vascular smooth muscle cell of arterial. So they act directly on the vascular smooth muscle cells of arterial. So this one, they don't go against the stimulus or the receptor. They just work intrinsically inside directly on the vascular smooth muscles. Just as I've said in my second point here, you can see, unlike most other antihypertensives, these agents do not work through autonomic receptors. So they don't target receptors. They don't target our stimulus like the norepinephrine, the DH. No, they just work intrinsically, directly. So, unlike most other antihypertensive agents, these ones, they don't work through the receptors. They don't work through the RAS system. They don't work through the ion channels. Yeah. So they relax arterial smooth muscles by intracellular mechanism, producing selective dilation of the resistant vessels with little or no effect on the capacitance vessel. So this one, the drugs that fall under this category of direct arterial vasodilators, how they work is that they tend to produce selective dilation to the arterioles with very little effect on the capacitance vessels like the veins. Yeah, and they work through intracellular mechanism. Yeah, so because they trigger aggressive homeostatic reflexes, direct arterial vasodilators are not used first, second, or third line therapies for routine hypertension. So these drugs, most vasodilators tend to cause reflex tachycardia, yeah, a homeostatic aggressive response. So that being said, they're rarely used as first, second, or third therapy routine. They're always used in conjunction with other drugs. I'm going to look later. So they're positioned fourth, fifth line medications reserved for resistant hypertension, maybe when there's a hypertensive crisis or specific obstetric emergencies, like mostly the hydralazine, very good when it comes to obstetric emergencies. Now, some of the drugs that fall under this category, number one is the hydralazine. I'm very certain you guys have come across this drug. It's a very common drug. As you can see, we have got an intravenous or M formulation that can be used. We also have an oral formulation of hydralazine. So these drugs are very common. I think the most area that I've seen it when it comes to when in obstetric emergency department, they're very good. There are also some of the drugs that are used to control hypertensive crisis and pregnancy. Yeah. So number one, so adrenaline is very unique drug now in that they don't have an exact molecular pharmacology. It's basically they are multifactorial. They work in various mechanisms. So the first mechanism under which they work, number one, is they inhibit IP3. They inhibit inositol triphosphate, induced calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum inside vascular smooth muscle cells. So they work by inhibiting the IP3. And remember, IP3 was the major mediator when it came to vasoconstriction. So remember IP3, in my previous slide, the IP3, it always causes the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So hydralazine, what it does, it inhibits IP3. It inhibits IP3. Number two, it can also stimulate the endothelium to synthesize nitric oxide. The nitric oxide will lead to vasodilation. So this is something that you have to understand. So in short, hydralazine, number one, it goes against IP3 to minimize vasoconstriction and also promotes vasodilation by promoting the formation or the production of nitric oxide from the endothelium. So that's what you have to know. So when that happens, this reduction in the free cytoplasmic calcium, so there will be a decreased intracellular calcium, and a decreased intracellular calcium leads to the activation of the myosin light chain kinase. And when you activate the MLCK, the myosin light chain kinase, uh, when you prevent the activation of the MLCK, you will halt the actin myosin cross bridge, and this will lead to relaxation. So it the in the just a summary everything that I've said here. Hydralazine basically it's a direct vasodilator, in that number one, it doesn't target the receptor, it doesn't target the stimulus. What it does, it goes directly by inhibiting the IP3, and we know the IP3 is a major mediator when it comes to vasoconstriction. So by inhibiting IP3, it means it will reduce vasoconstriction, and not only that, it also promotes the formation of nitric oxide, and we know the nitric oxide will lead to formation of the PKG. PKG leads to vasodilation. Yeah. So all that being mentioned, there will be reduction in calcium in the cell, and the decreased calcium will prevent the activation of the MLCK. And when you prevent MLCK activation, you lead to relaxation. I believe that has been understood. So, for those guys who maybe I'm too wordy, you can use this summary here. So adenosine number one inhibits IP3 calcium release from SCR from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and when this happens, it activates guanylyl cyclase. Yeah. Also, it's also very good uh, antioxidant. It preserves nitric oxide bioavailability. So these are some of the things. So number one, it promotes nitric oxide presence. It also goes against IP3. Yeah, yeah. Remember, nitric oxide will lead to activation of cyclic GMP. So nitric oxide also always leads to activation of guanylyl cyclase cGMPs. That's something that you have to remember. So that's all about hydralazine. Let's continue. So hydralazine, this is just an what indications that are derived from an AI. So what you can see, the major indications of hydralazine, number one is hypertension. Obviously, it can be used for those clients with hypertension. Very good in pregnancy. Pregnancy-induced hypertension can be used. It can also be used in hypertensive emergencies. You can see here it's always used as a combination agent in heart failure. It can be used in combination with organic nitrates like the isosabid dinitrate. I'm going to explain later. It's also good in perioperative hypertension. So these are some of the indications when it comes to using hydralazine. So remember, one thing that I have to remember is that this is an antihypertensive agent. It works directly. It's a direct arterial vasodilator. It tends to work on the arterial it's an arterial vasodilator. That being said, the major results here is that it leads to a reduced peripheral vascular resistance and reduced blood pressure. So hydralazine, in short, hydralazine reduces the afterload. Hydralazine reduces the peripheral vascular resistance. Hydralazine reduces the blood pressure. That's something that you have to know. And then remember, it's one of the agents that can be used in pregnancy-induced hypertension. Now, a continuation that you have to continue. Another drug that is very common is minoxidil sulfate. Now, curious, this drug is in many indications they're always used for those guys who want extra extra hair. Yeah. So minoxidil is very okay. It's an antihypertensive agent, but in major cases it's always used as a hair regrowth treatment. If you see minoxidil in most scenarios, it's always used as an hair regrowth treatment. But let's continue. How does it work? Okay, minoxidil sulfate. You know that for this one, it opens. It's an potassium channel opener. This one here, it opens ATP sensitive potassium channels. And you know, if you open potassium channels, there will be potassium efflux. The potassium will leave the cell. And when potassium leaves the cell, there will be membrane hyperpolarization. And membrane hyperpolarization will close the voltage L-type calcium channels. This channel here, they always depend on increased positive charges. So if you decrease the positive charge, it means you are going to close the calcium channel. And if you close the calcium channel, you are going to decrease the level of calcium or the calcium influx. So the decreased calcium influx will favor myosin dephosphorylation by the activation of the MLCP, as I've explained later, resulting in smooth muscle relaxation, arterial vasodilation, decreased peripheral resistance, and also that will lead to a decreased blood pressure. So that's how that works. So this drug also it can also be apart from it being called a direct arterial vasodilator, minoxidil can also be called a potassium channel opener. So that's something that I have to remember. It works by targeting the ATP sensitive calcium channels. Yeah, that's what it does. It opens the potassium channels. So this drug is can be used, number one, in severe refractory hypertension reserved for patients not responding to other drugs. So if the clients are using other antihypertensives and they're not responding to drugs, we can decide to use minoxidil. Apart from that, this drug is very good for alopecia. Yeah. So because it stimulates hair growth, it really helps in hair growth. So for those clients who have no hair, who have got alopecia, this drug that they tend to use, the minoxidil sulfate. So adverse effect, obviously, because they lead to hair growth, they may lead to hypertrichosis. Yeah, there'll be an excessive hair growth by using this drug. Just like other vasodilators, they lead to reflex tachycardia. That's something they have to know, and they may also cause fluid retention. Another side effects is they may cause dizziness and lightheadedness. So this is all about minoxidil sulfate. Minoxidil sulfate can also be classified as a direct arterial vasodilator. And you can see in this diagram here, you've got two. This one here, a topical solution, and here you've got an oral solution that can be used, can be swallowed orally. Now, let's continue. Another classification of drug that you have is the diazoxide. So diazoxide also can be classified as a direct arterial vasodilator. But let me this is our drug here, our diazoxide oral suspension. Now, just like the minoxidil, this one also tends to work the same way as minoxidil in that it opens the potassium channels. If you open the potassium channels, there will be an efflux of potassium. Yeah, the potassium will lead the vascular smooth muscle cell, and when the potassium leave, there will be a decrease in the positive charge. There will be membrane hyperpolarization. Membrane hyperpolarization will close the L-type voltage calcium channels. Yeah, and that will decrease the calcium influx, as you can see here. So when this happens, there will be myosin dephosphorylation. Obviously, the myosin and actin will be disconnected, obviously leading to relaxation. Arterial vasodilation automatically decreased peripheral resistance and decreased blood pressure. So once you understand the formula of blood pressure, you can easily understand how these drugs work. So historically, this drug was used for hypertension emergencies, but now it's uncommon. Let me confess, since I began my nursing profession, I haven't come across the azoxide. Yeah, maybe I never saw it, but for those guys who have come across it, please type on the comment section below. Let us know why you use the drug. Tell us the indication of why you use the drug. Tell us the dosage that you use so that we can learn together. But for me, I never came across this drug. Now, there's one thing that this drug is known for. It's always used for insulinoma. Yeah, insulinoma. In that, these drugs always inhibit insulin release via the pancreatic beta cells. So how does this happen? This happens because this drug, remember, is a potassium channel opener. So this happens by acting as a potent opener of ATP potassium channels. And why is this important? Now, let me just give you a small story about how insulin is being produced. If you look at physiology of insulin production, insulin is always produced via one mechanism. I believe you guys will do this when you look at the oral antidiabetic agents later in our sessions. Now, but for this session, let me just try to explain what happens. This is what happens when there's a glucose increase in the body. When there's a glucose increase in the body, there's always production of ATP. Yeah, when there's an increase in when there's an increase in glucose in the body, we always have an ATP production. There's an increase in the ATP production. Now, the ATP production, what it does is that it always remember this is an ATP. So when there's an increase in ATP production, ATP production, it always leads to the closure of potassium channels in the beta cells. So there will be a closure of potassium channels in the beta cells, and when there's a closure of potassium channels, this leads to a decreased calcium efflux from the beta cells. So a decreased calcium efflux leads to an increased positive charge. So the beta cells will have an increased positive charge, and the increased positive charge in the beta cells leads to a cell depolarization. Yeah, and the cell depolarization opens the voltage gated calcium channels, and that will lead to calcium influx. So when the calcium enters the beta cells, what happens? The increased calcium in the cell will promote the exocytosis of insulin. So in short, uh, uh, for insulin to be produced, potassium has to be involved, and also calcium has to involved. So if we have an agent that goes against the potassium, we will also have an impact on the insulin production. So what happens? The diazoxide, what it does is that it opens the potassium channels of the beta cells, and when the potassium channels are opened, there will be a potassium efflux. Potassium will leave the beta cells, and when potassium leave the beta cells will become hyperpolarized, and when the beta cells become hyperpolarized, it means the calcium channels will be closed. When the calcium channels are closed, it means there will be a decreased calcium in the beta cells. A decreased calcium will decrease the amount of exocytosis and a decrease in insulin production. So in short, diazoxide always goes against insulin production. So diazoxide inhibits insulin production. So that's what I wanted to say. But don't worry, in our next sessions in future, we are going to have a sitting on how this happens. So just know that diazoxide, it tends to promote or inhibit insulin production. That's something that you have to remember. So side effects, number one is hyperglycemia. Why? Because it inhibits insulin release. So because it inhibits insulin release, it leads to hyperglycemia. Number two, it can also lead to fluid retention, just like minoxidil. It can also cause reflex tachycardia, yeah, a homeostatic mechanism that tries to uh, increase the BP when BP becomes low. So it can also lead to reflex tachycardia. Now, what happens? Now, calcium. No, number two. Let's go now. Number two. Sorry, let me go back. So I believe now those three drugs are our direct arterial vasodilators. I've looked on hydralazine, minoxidil, and diazoxide. So hydralazine, minoxidil, and diazoxides are example of direct arterial vasodilators. But remember, diazoxide and minoxidil can also be called potassium channel openers. Now, number two, we have our calcium channel blockers. Now, here is where I want you guys to be very keen. Now, what's the physiology of calcium mediated contraction? Let me just put now what happens. Number one, this membrane. Let me go back. Now, number one, we always have membrane depolarization that happens. When this membrane depolarization, what happens? This may happen maybe because there's an increase of potassium inside. When there's an increased potassium, when there's potassium influx, there will be a membrane depolarization. When that happens, what happens? They'll be opened because these channels depend on voltage. So they'll be opened of voltage L-type calcium channels. When this happens, there'll be calcium influx. Calcium will enter the cell. An increased calcium will lead to calcium calmodulin complex, which now will activate myosin light chain kinase. An activated myosin light chain kinase will lead to myosin phosphorylation. Myosin phosphorylation will lead to an actin myosin cross bridge formation, which leads to smooth muscle contraction and vasoconstriction. So that's how calcium controls vasoconstriction. Very simple. We should have an increase of calcium in the cell. When you have got an increased calcium in the cell, there will be a calcium calmodulin complex formed. Calcium calmodulin complex will activate the myosin light chain kinase. The myosin light chain kinase will lead to myosin phosphorylation, which leads to actin myosin cross bridge formation. And when this happens, when the actin myosin cross bridge formation happens, this leads to smooth muscle contraction and vasoconstriction. So calcium channel blockers, they interrupt this pathway. You can see here where I'm pointing with my red pen. So our CCBs, they act here, they close these channels, they act, they block, they interrupt this channel here, and that's how they work. So mechanism of action. Now there are two types or two broad categories of calcium channel blockers. The first one that you have, that those ones that are found on the vascular smooth muscles. So the ones that are found on the vascular smooth muscles, or those that act on the vascular smooth muscles, are the dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers. DINs, all the DINs, the nifedipines, the amlodipines, the DINs, suffix DINs. These are our vascular, those that act on the vascular smooth muscles are the dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers. So the calcium channel blockers, they bind to the L-type voltage gated calcium channels and prevent calcium entry. So the first step here is that the CCBs, they bind to the L-type. They bind to the L-type calcium channels and prevent calcium entry to the cells. Yeah, and we know when there's no calcium entry, all this process won't occur. Those that act on the cardiac muscles are called non-dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers, the likes of verapamil and diltiazem. So this one here, the ones that are found on the cardiac muscles, the main actions that they depress cardiac function by binding to and obstructing the L-type voltage calcium channels in both cardiomyocytes. Yeah, in cardiomyocytes, those ones that are found in the cardiomyocytes, and those that are found on the pacemaker. So they're found on the non-pacemaker, the cardiomyocytes, and also the nodal cells or the pacemaker cells. So one thing they have to know is that those that are cardioselective, they only target the calcium channels that are located in the cardiomyocytes and the pacemaker cells. So that being said, when that happens, those that are found on the cardiomyocytes or the non-pacemaker cells will lead to negative inotropic effect. They will decrease the contractility. Yeah, they will decrease the contractility, and we know if you decrease the contractility, you are going to decrease you are going to decrease the stroke volume, as we explained. Remember, on our first episode, when you explain the meaning of contractility, how does contractility affect blood pressure? When there's contractility, there's always an increased ejection fraction, the amount of blood being pumped by the ventricle. And when there's a high amount being pumped by the ventricle, when there's an increased ejection fraction, it means there will be very little end systolic volume. There will be a reduction in the end systolic volume, and a reduction in the end systolic volume tends to increase our stroke volume. Yeah, an increased stroke volume will increase the cardiac output, and the rest happens. So this drug, they always have those that are found in the non-pacemaker cells, they have got a negative inotropic effect, and this also will lead to number one, decreased blood pressure, and also they also unburden the heart's workload. It will reduce the heart workload. The heart will not have to contract so much. Then number two, those ones that are found in the sinoatrial node and the AV nodes. Those that are found in the nodal cells, the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular nodes. So here we know that in these two nodes, we always have an action potential that relies entirely on the calcium currents for depolarization. So if at all you have got drugs that block these channels, it means that we will have a negative chronotropic effect. It will slow down the firing rate. So there will be a negative, there will be a decreased heart rate. And a decreased heart rate leads to a decreased cardiac output. A decreased cardiac output leads to a decreased blood pressure. So that's something that you have to know. So it leads to a negative chronotropic effect and a less conduction of velocity. That's called a negative dromotropic effect. Lowering the heart rate. So they lower the heart rate, and they're very crucial tools when it comes to tachyarrhythmias. Yeah. So these drugs, that's why the non-dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers that are always classified as class 4 antiarrhythmic drugs. They're very good antiarrhythmic drugs. So the non-dihydropridine calcium channel blockers, the likes of verapamil and diltiazem, they're very good drugs when it comes to antiarrhythmias. Yeah, they're cardioselective. Unlike the dihydropridines, these ones here, they only work on the vascular smooth muscles, the likes of the nifedipine, the amlodipine, the clevidipine, and the rest. So let's begin with the first class called the dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers. Now this one here, they reduce the vascular smooth muscles in systemic resistance arterioles with minimal to no direct effect on cardiac conduction or myocardial contractility. These ones here, they majorly work on the vascular smooth muscles. They have little effect when it comes to uh, cardiac impact. So we've got example here. I've got the nifedipine, which is very common. It's a first generation drug. We also have the second generation, the felodipine and the nicardipine. We have the third generation, the amlodipine, the clevidipine. Very good drug. This drug is a very crucial drug. You guys have to know it. And the lecanidipine. So we have got the nifedipine, the felodipine, the nicardipine, the amlodipine, the clevidipine, and the lecanidipine. So the dipines, if you see the dipines. So the dipines, these are the dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers. The dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers, what they do is they relax the vascular smooth muscle. They relax the vascular smooth muscles in the arterioles. Yeah, and when that happens, basically it means they will decrease the afterload, or they will decrease the systemic vascular resistance. So they bind to the L-type voltage gated calcium channels and prevent calcium entry into the cell that I've explained. So this action lowers the intracellular calcium levels and favor myosin dephosphorylation, resulting in smooth muscle relaxation, arterial vasodilation, decreased peripheral resistance, and reduced blood pressure that I've explained. So this is good. These drugs are indicated. Indications number one, they're very good drugs when it comes to essential hypertension. Long-acting ones are like the amlodipine or extended release nifedipine are recommended as first-line therapies for management of routine hyperpressure. So nifedipine may be used as first-line for essential hypertension. I'm very sure you guys have seen clients being given nifedipine, yeah, when they've got a very high blood pressure. Nifedipine can be used as a first-line therapy. Nifedipine is also a good drug. It can also be used in pregnancy. So it can also be used in vascular disorders like the Raynaud's. It can also be used in hypertensive emergencies that I've explained. The third generation, the clevidipine, is a very good drug when it comes to hypertensive emergencies. Can be used. They can also be used in some subarachnoid hemorrhage. But here, the one that is crucial here is the nimodipine. This is the one that tends to be used here. Nifedipine also has got some unique use off-label. Number one, it can be used in pregnancy, hypertension in pregnancy. So far, I think till this point, we have looked on drugs that can be used in pregnancy. We have looked at nifedipine here, number one, hydralazine, number two. We looked on methyl dopa during our second episode. Methyl dopa also as a drug that can be used. So far, I've looked at some of the drugs that are very good when it comes to pregnancy or hypertension in pregnancy. Apart from that, one thing that you have to know is that nifedipine also has been used as a tocolytic agent, yeah, off label as a tocolytic agent, yeah. It reduces the uterine contractions, so that's something that you have to know, yeah. It reduces the uterine contraction. That being said, it has got some obstetric use, yeah. So I'm very sure you guys have come across nifedipine being used in the labor wards or in the labor wards. Yeah, it's a very good drug that is being used there. So these are some of the indications when it comes to using the dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers. So that being said, you can see here I've got the clevidipine, the third generation, very good drug. It's always whitish, looks like it's a very good drug. Looks like proper fall, so you have to be very keen because of its whitish appearance. Don't confuse it. You've got also the amlodipines, you've got the nicardipines, you've got the nifedipines that are used. So these are some of the drugs that fall under this category. So side effects number one, they may cause ankle edema because of the mismatch arteriolar versus venular dilation. So what happens? These drugs, they always cause arteriolar dilation. And remember, uh, arteriolar dilation, arteriolar capillaries and venular dilation. When there's a mismatch, there will be an increase in the capillary hydrostatic pressure. Do you remember, guys, when we tackled the ACEs, the likes of the enalapril, when it comes to the renal importance, we said that sometimes what happens when you have the afferent arterial and the afferent arterial, the size matters, or the size affects the amount of glomerular filtration process. Yeah, so same happens when you've got a mismatch in the dilation of the arteriolar and the venular dilation. Like these drugs, when you use these drugs, there's a higher arteriolar dilation than the venular dilation, and that mismatch will lead to accretion of a higher capillary hydrostatic pressure. So that will lead to leakage of fluid, causing some ankle edema. So it may also cause reflex tachycardia. Most vasodilators always lead to reflex tachycardia. And this happens why? Because the bioreceptor mediated sympathetic surge in response to sudden drop in blood pressure. So there's always a bioreceptor mediated sympathetic surge that happens in response to the sudden drop of blood pressure. And when this happens, there's always an elevation of heart rate, yeah, which leads to tachycardia. The client may also have some flushing and headaches. This always happens because of rapid vasodilation of cutaneous and meningeal arterial beds. It may also called gingival hyperplasia because of the altered calcium, which leads to altered calcium dynamics in gingival fibroblasts, leading to collagen buildup. Also, that may lead to gingival hyperplasia. That being said, this one drug that you guys must know. This is a drug called clevidipine. It's a very good drug, commonly used. Now, the reason why I'm trying to stress this drug is because uh, in ICUs you may have this drug, you may confuse this drug with another common drug called propofol because of the appearance. So clevidipine number one, you have to know that this drug is a third generation ultra short acting dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker designed exclusively for intravenous. So this drug number one is always for intravenous administration. There's only IV formulation for this drug, clevidipine. Number two, this drug is always has some unique formulations. Number one is highly lipophilic, and that being said, is poorly soluble in water. It's formulated as a milky white lipid emulsion. It tends to appear like a white milky lipid emulsion. So be very keen because sometimes you can see people confusing it with propofol. So don't confuse it with propofol. It's very whitish in appearance. Yeah. So that's something that you have to note. Yeah, so because it's an oil in water lipid emulsification, structurally identical to an aesthetic profile. So it's very similar to in appearance to propofol. So you have to note that. So mechanism of action I've explained, just like the rest of the dihydropyridines, calcium channel blockers. This drug also leads to arteriolar selective vasodilation. When this happens, it will decrease the systemic vascular resistance, or it will decrease the afterload, and a decrease in the afterload will lead to a decreased blood pressure. Or you have to note it may cause reflex tachycardia. So that being said, this is a small video that I want you guys to watch. I was really amazed by how this nurse explained some of the indications and how the clevidipine looks like. So I'll just take 2 minutes for you guys to watch this video and appreciate how this drug works, or this drug is being used in our medical facility. And before you watch the video, we have to know that this drug has some contraindications. So before you give this drug, you have to ensure that the client doesn't have severe egg or soy allergies, and also the client doesn't have a defective lipid metabolism. This may impact the administration. So clevidipine is a very good drug. I've singled it out because it's an upcoming drug, really used in our ICUs, and as a nurse you have to be vigilant when it comes to using it. There's a case that I had of a client of a nurse who confused clevidipine and propofol, and because that was mentioned, I decided to focus on this drug and also show a video clip on how you can, as a nurse, you can understand how this drug works, how it looks like, and the side effects, the mechanism of action. No, just let us watch the video. Let's now play the video. I don't know if can the video play. Just go here. Move my marker pen, that's a pointer. And now, let me now play.
Are you familiar with clobetapine? Here in the US, it's sold under the trade name of Clevaprex. It's a really great niche drug that is preferred by a lot of our neurologists to be able to control a patient's blood pressure. And let's break down why. Clevaprex is a calcium channel blocker, and it's a third generation calcium channel blocker, so it's a little more sophisticated than some of our older drugs. And that's exactly why some neurologists prefer this precise drug over something like nicardipine or even a beta blocker to control a patient's blood pressure, especially when there's a traumatic brain injury. So this calcium channel blocker is very fast on, fast off, and tends not to give us huge drops in a patient's blood pressure like we can get with giving a bolus of a beta blocker. So we start this and we titrate it so quickly. Its onset is less than a minute, but its half-life is about 2 minutes. So if we get it wrong and we do give a little too much, we can back off and immediately restore that patient's blood pressure. This acts to relax that vascular smooth muscle, causing vasodilation and therefore dropping our systemic vascular resistance. And you have to keep in mind, with a patient with a traumatic brain injury, if they have hypertension, we of course don't want that because that's going to lend to more bleeding inside the brain. However, we don't want to drop their blood pressure because that's going to inhibit our cerebral perfusion pressure. And remember, the brain is a hungry hippo of oxygen. It cannot go a moment without a constant oxygen supply. And if you come in and you drop that blood pressure too quickly, we very quickly develop ischemia and neurologic deficits. There's a handful of things that we got to be aware of if we're going to start a Clevaprex drip on our patients. Number one, it probably looks very similar to propofol. If you thought in the very opener of the video, oh, she's going to talk about propofol, that's a common mistake. So make sure when you're grabbing a glass vial of milky substance, you're differentiating between propofol and Clevaprex, because you certainly wouldn't want to mix those two up. But like propofol, this is also a lipid emulsion. And the primary lipid that it's used to make it is a soy-based oil. And so if your patient has a soy allergy, we cannot give them this. Additionally, it's also made with egg products. So if your patient has an egg allergy, this is an absolute no-go. And of course, because it's in this glass jar, you have to use your vented tubing, or else you're just going to get it airlocked in there and it's not going to flow through your tubing. Dosing for this super precise medication is we typically start at 2 milligrams per hour. We double it every 90 seconds until we reach the desired effect with a max dose of 32 milligrams per hour. The Smarty Pants pharmacists tell us that for every 1 to 2 milligram per hour increase of the Clevaprex infusion is going to drop the systolic blood pressure by about 2 to 4 millimeters of mercury. One of the most common side effects that we see with an initiation of a Clevaprex drip on our patients is reflex tachycardia, especially if you're a little too aggressive with titrating this up and you get a big drop in your patient's blood pressure. The heart will try to compensate by beating a little bit faster. Have you ever given Clevaprex?
Yes, that was a very good demonstration of clevidipine. So for those guys who are working in ICU, or if you're a student, you come across this drug. If you see a drug that looks like a white milky, like you have to confirm if it's a propofol or if it's a Cleviprex or a clevidipine. So don't confuse. We had a case whereby a nurse mixed the two or confused the two. So that's why I took my time to at least have a mention of this drug called clevidipine. So that being said, I believe now you can continue from where we left. Now, our next slide now, we're going to look on other classification of drugs called the non-dihydropyridines. Remember, these drugs are also called class 4 antiarrhythmic drugs, the verapamil and the diltiazem, because they are cardioselective. They target the L-type calcium channels that are found in the cardiomyocytes, the non-pacemaker cells, and also the pacemaker cells like the SAN and the AVNs. So that being mentioned, now unlike the dihydropyridines such as amlodipine or nifedipine, which exhibit profound selectivity for peripheral blood vessels. Let me take my laser point now. Unlike dihydropyridines such as amlodipine or nifedipine, which exhibit profound selectivity for peripheral blood vessels, non-dihydropyridines are highly cardioselective. They are cardioselective. That's why I said they are, because of their negative chronotropic effect, negative dromotropic effect, negative ionotropic effect. They're very good drugs when it comes to antihypertension and also antiarrhythmic. They're very good drugs used to manage atrial flutter, used to manage atrial fibrillation, and the rest. And so the drugs here used, number one is the verapamil, and also you've got the diltiazem. So these two drugs, don't forget, they're also calcium channel blockers, or to be more specific, they're non-dihydropyridines calcium channel blockers. They're cardioselective. They target the calcium channels that are found on the heart muscle. Now, the mechanism of action is very similar to the dihydropyridines, but the only difference that where they act on on the different site. Now they inhibit the L-type voltage gated calcium channels in the sinoatrial node, and when they act on the sinoatrial node, they will lead to a negative chronotropic effect. They will decrease the heart rate, and when they act on the AVN, they will lead to negative dromotropic effect. They will decrease the AV conduction, and also when they act on the cardiomyocytes, they will lead to negative inotropic effect, or they decrease the contractility. So this is how they act. These are the various sites under which these drugs work on. Yeah, they're very good drugs when it comes to arrhythmias. So we all know that they will decrease because, for instance, those that are negative chronotropic, they will decrease the heart rate, yeah, decrease the cardiac output, and decrease the blood pressure. They're also very good when it comes to chronic stable angina. How? Because of their dual action. So they drop their myocardial oxygen demand, because remember, they decrease the heart rate. Yeah, and not only that, they also decrease the force of contraction, the contractility. Yeah, so because of their negative inotropic and chronotropic effect, they're very good drugs for chronic stable angina. And when this happens, they also have got some impact where they mildly dilate the coronary arteries to improve the supply. Remember, the coronary arteries, they always perfuse the heart muscles, so you want them to be well dilated. Yeah. So these drugs are very good when it comes to dilating also the coronary arteries. I've said they are very good when it comes to arrhythmias. They are very good for AFib, flutter, and also SVT, a type of SVT called AVNRT. So they're very good drugs when it comes to dealing with arrhythmias. They are class 4 antiarrhythmic drugs. Yeah, class 4 antiarrhythmic drugs. So side effects, number one, obviously they lead to bradycardia because they have the negative chronotropic effect. They lead to bradycardia. They mostly lead to severe constipation. Remember, we also have got calcium channels in our JT. Yeah, and when you and this the calcium tends to help in the peristaltic movement and contractions. So if you block these channels, you may lead to constipation. So you have to check for constipation when the client is on calcium channel blockers. Apart from that, also just like the previous ones, they also have got a gingival hyperplasia. So this all about the non-dihydropyridines. Note, these drugs here, these ones are not vasodilators. These drugs here is just a hint. They are a special type of calcium channel blockers that are cardioselective. So don't confuse. If you're told to mention some of the drugs that are vasodilators, don't mention these drugs. Don't mention verapamil or diltiazem. These ones are not vasodilators. I have just mentioned because I think it's useful for our topic, or useful for our understanding on calcium channel blockers. So please don't confuse. Now let's move on. So you have our diltiazem injection there. We also have our diltiazem oral solution. We also have, you can see, our verapamil oral tabs, of verapamil injection. So they exist into various formulations. I'm sure you guys have come across them, be it in ICU, medical wards, and you see how they're being used. So don't forget, these drugs are cardioselective. They've got a negative chronotropic effect, negative dromotropic effect, and negative inotropic effect. So that's something that you have to remember when it comes to using these drugs. Now let's move forward. Now let's look at nitrates and nitric oxide donors. Remember this one pathway that I told you guys, one pathway that leads to vasodilation, and this pathway is nitric oxide dependent. So when we want to go against an increased blood pressure, we want to vasodilate our vessels, and the best pathway to follow is the nitric oxide, the CGMP pathway. This pathway leads to vasodilation. So nitrates and nitric oxide donors are potent vasodilators used primarily in the treatment of angina pectoris, acute coronary syndromes, acute heart failure, hypertensive emergencies like the sodium nitroprusside, and pulmonary edema. So they act by releasing nitric oxide, a naturally occurring endothelial derived relaxing factor that causes vascular smooth muscle relaxation through activation of this nitric oxide CGMP protein kinase G pathway, the pathway that leads to vasodilation. So in short, these drugs they promote the vasodilatory pathway, the nitric oxide pathway that leads to vasodilation. So the principal effect here is that these drugs, most of them, they tend to lead to vasodilation. And remember, if you lead to vasodilation, you'll reduce the venous return and also the preload. And when that happens, also you are decreasing the myocardial oxygen demand. So at higher doses, so this most of the nitrates. One hint: when it comes to nitrates, most and the nitric oxide donors, most of them they always cause vasodilation. They're very good vasodilators. But some only cause arterial dilation when used under higher doses, like the nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin is a very good vasodilator, but it can also become a arterial dilator when used in high doses. So that's something that you have to remember. Now, when it comes to classification of nitrates and nitric oxide donors, the first class that we have are the organic nitrates. Now, this one here, they have to be converted. They have to go by conversion. We have got the likes of nitroglycerin or the GTN. We've got the isosobid dinitrate and the isosobid mononitrate. We also have got the nitric oxide donors. Here we have the sodium nitroprusside and the inhaled nitric oxide. But for this lesson, I want you guys to focus more on the common ones, like the nitroglycerin, very common, very common. We also have got the sodium nitroprusside, which is also very common. So those two drugs, don't forget. But you may also come across isosobid mononitrate and isosobid dinitrate. Now, mechanism of action: these drugs work on the vasodilatory pathway, the nitric oxide pathway. What happens? So, number one, organic nitrates undergo enzymatic conversion within the vascular smooth muscles, where you have got nitroglycerin, isosobid nitrate. So, the organic nitrates, remember, you have got the number one, the organic nitrates, and the nitric oxide donors. So, for the organic nitrates, they have to undergo a bioconversion, the enzymatic conversion. They have to be converted within the vascular smooth muscles. Yeah. When that happens, they release the nitric oxide. And remember, this is our factor that you want. This is our potential factor. Now, once you have the nitric oxide will diffuse into the vascular smooth muscle and bind to the soluble guanylyl cyclase, the SGC. Now, when that happens, there will be an activation of SGC, which will convert the GTP, guanine triphosphate, to cyclic guanine monophosphate. There's GTP to CGMP. So when we have the CGMP will activate our protein kinase G. And remember, our protein kinase G is our principal mediator. This one here, our protein kinase G is our principal mediator. We need to have it. This is the one that will help in mediating vasodilation. Now, so the PKG number one inhibits the IP3 mediated calcium release, which happens from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So it will inhibit calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's the first thing. Number two, it will also open potassium channel, leading to hyperpolarization. And remember, if you open potassium channel, there will be potassium efflux. Potassium will leave the vascular smooth muscle cell. And when potassium leaves, there will be hyperpolarization. Hyperpolarization will lead to a closure of the L-type channel. Yeah, the L-type calcium channel will be closed. So it will reduce the calcium entry via these channels. Don't forget that. Now, when all this happens, we will finally have an activation of the myosin light chain phosphatase. The myosin light chain phosphatase, it always dephosphorylates the myosin. So there will be a dephosphorylation of myosin, and when this happens, there will be a smooth muscle relaxation. So that's how it happens. Now, the nitrates and the nitric oxide donors, they always have two effects. They've got the venodilation effect, and also they've got the arterial dilation effect. Now, for venodilation effect, we know that veins are more sensitive to nitrates than arteries. That's something that I explained in our previous slides. That being said, there will be venodilation, which will lead to venous pooling. Venous pooling will reduce the venous return, and a reduced venous return will reduce the preload. A reduced preload will decrease the stroke volume. The stroke volume, reduced stroke volume will reduce the cardiac output and reduce the blood pressure. So that's how venodilation effect leads to a decreased blood pressure. I hope you've understood. So it's always so in short, venodilation effect, it always have a negative impact on the preload. So venodilation effect reduces preload, and our arterial dilation effect reduces our afterload. That's something that we have to remember. Now, apart from this, it also reduces the ventricular wall tension and reduce myocardial oxygen demand. That was very good when it comes to angina. Then, this is the major anti-anginal mechanism. So that's why these drugs are very good for angina, the likes of nitroglycerin. So when it comes to arterial dilation effect here, they're only used at higher doses. The only drug in this category that leads to arterial dilation, number one, is the sodium nitroprusside. Number two, so the sodium nitroprusside is a nitric oxide donor. For the nitrates, the nitroglycerin has to be used with higher doses. Yeah, higher dose nitroglycerin will lead to arterial dilation effect. Okay, reduced. When used at higher doses, there will be reduced systemic vascular resistance. We all know this will lead to a reduced afterload, a reduced cardiac work, and also there will be a reduced blood pressure. Apart from all these two effects, they also lead to coronary vasodilation. They tends to this drug dilate the coronary arteries, and when you dilate the coronary arteries, you're going to improve you're going to improve coronary blood flow. Yeah, you're going to perfuse the heart muscles well, and that will also improve the myocardial oxygen supply. So that's why this with this effect here, it's a very good or useful when it comes to vasospastic angina. Now let's begin with nitroglycerin, very good drug. So this one, other times in other books, they may be called glyceryl trinitrate. Yeah, it's a potent prodrug that releases nitric oxide, causing rapid, smooth. So what you have to know is that this nitroglycerin, the nitrates, they always release nitric oxide after a bioconversion, after an enzymatic conversion is when they release the nitric oxide. This is unlike the nitric oxide donor, the likes of sodium nitroprusside. You just release the nitric oxide without the bioconversion. So here they release the nitric oxide. When this happens, they will lead to smooth muscle relaxation and profound venous. They've got a profound venous selectivity. They tend to cause more venodilation. I've explained this how it happens. When you release nitric oxide, you're going to activate soluble guanylyl cyclase. After if you activate the soluble guanylyl cyclase, you're going to increase cyclic GMP. If you increase cyclic GMP, you're going to activate PKG. PKG is the principal mediator that leads to the vasodilation and leads to smooth muscle relaxation. I've explained this one. I don't know why I should repeat. So nitric oxide leads to SGC activation, which leads to CGMP formation, which activates PKG. PKG number one will decrease calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It will also decrease the calcium release from the L-type calcium channel activity. It will also lead to improve activity of the myosin light chain phosphatase activity, which leads to dephosphorylation of the myosin, and that leads to this will lead to vasodilation. So in hemodynamic effect, we know that these drugs they are very good when it comes to venodilation. It will decrease the preload and low doses, but also it can also cause moderate arterial dilation, whereby it decreases the afterload, and this only happens when in high dose. So in high dose nitroglycerin may lead to arterial dilation. Apart from that, it also causes coronary vasodilation. That's why nitrates are a very good drug when it comes to angina. So effects on myocardial oxygen balance. So these drugs tends to decrease myocardial oxygen demand. Number two, they increase coronary blood flow. Number three, they relieve ischemia. Very good. In terms of pharmacokinetics, this drug, number one, the high fast pass metabolism. the rapid onset, especially when given sublingually, yeah, under the tongue. This drug, they also got short duration of action. Adverse effects, number one, these drugs, they may cause headache, flushing, orthostatic hypotension. Yes, vasodilators also may they tend to cause an orthostatic hypotension, also reflects tachycardia, explained, and syncope. Drug interactions. This drug, you should be very careful. This drug should not be given for clients who have taken sildenafil or tadalafil or the vardenafil. Yeah, the phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitors. So those guys are taking these inhibitors, these drugs like the sildenafil, tadalafil, and the vardenafil. They should not take nitroglycerin. I think this is the Viagra. Can you confirm? I think this is the Viagra, but I'm not sure. At one free time, go and check Viagra. Which category does Viagra fall into? But for now, just know that the clients who are taking sildenafil should not take nitroglycerin. It's very very dangerous. When these clients take nitro and sildenafil together, there will be a rapid decrease of blood pressure, which can be very very much lethal. So that's something that you have to note. It may lead to severe hypertension. So that's our nitroglycerin. As you can see in our diagram there, you've got various formulation. I've got the intravenous formulation here, and also you've got those that are placed sublingually. For nitroglycerin, number one is a predominantly vasodilator. So it's a very good vasodilator. Number one, it's a drug of choice when it comes to acute angina relief. It reduces preload more than afterload. It only reduces afterload when given in under high doses or under high dosage. So this drug should not be used for those clients with hypertension, those clients with hypovolemia, those clients who have got raised intracranial pressure, or those clients who are using the sildenafil. Now, our other common drug is the sodium nitroprusside. This drug is very common. Number one, this is what it looks like. You've got here the one that is used for IV use only. Yeah, so the sodium nitroprusside is a potent, rapidly acting intravenous vasodilator. It always comes in IV formulation, as you can see in our image there. So this drug is a very unique one. Why? Unlike other nitrates, this drug is a nitric oxide donor. It releases nitric oxide directly into the circulation. Yeah, it does not require an enzymatic bioactivation like the nitroglycerin. It's just this one is unique. It's a donor. It releases nitric oxide directly into the circulation. Then sodium nitroprusside, number one, another unique feature is that it dilates both arteries and veins. And when you dilate both, what happens? When you dilate arteries, are going to decrease afterload. When you decrease veins, are going to decrease preload. So that's something that I've explained. Now, this dual action makes it one of the most powerful vasodilators available in clinical medicine. So these drugs are it's one of the powerful vasodilator, very powerful. I'm going to show a video later on how this works, but for now, let's just focus on what you're going to do. Now, one of the uses of this drug, number one, it's very good when it comes to hypertensive emergencies, acute heart failure, or acute pulmonary edema. It can also be used, number one, it can be root intravenously. There's only an intravenous formulation. Its onset is rapid, happens within seconds. And we know that apart from one of the things that you have to note when it comes to this drug, apart from releasing nitric oxide, this drug also releases cyanide ions. So there's one major complication that comes when using this drug. One of the major adverse effects is the cyanide toxicity. Don't forget the cyanide toxicity is one of the major adverse effects. You can also have excessive hypotension, the reflex tachycardia that happens with also other nitrates. Good headaches, nausea, vomiting. So for those guys who are not understanding, please, this is a video. You can just forward back and look at the slides. But I believe under this in this slide of ours, they take away the points that you have to note. Number one is that the sodium nitroprusside is a nitric oxide donor. Number two is that it works both on arteries and the veins, and that means it causes a decrease in the SVR and the afterload. It also causes a decrease in the preload and the decrease in the venous return. Yeah, and we know that when metabolized, it releases also cyanide ions. And so one of the adverse effects that comes with using this drug is the cyanide toxicity. Don't forget that. It may also cause reflex tachycardia and the rest. Now, the following chart is basically a summary of what I was trying to explain. When it comes to nitric and nitric oxide donors, we always have got four major drugs. So we've got the nitroglycerin, the nitrates. The first nitrate here is the nitroglycerin or the GTN. You've got the isosobid dinitrate and isosobid mononitrate. And the nitric oxide donor here, we've got the sodium nitroprusside. Yeah. So when it comes to onset, the nitroglycerin obviously works under 1 to 3 minutes. This one 15 to 30 minutes. This one 30 to 60 minutes. This one is very quick, within seconds. Duration, obviously, nitrate is short acting. The dinitrate is intermediate. The isosobid mononitrate is long acting. So that's why this one is always used as a prophylaxis. Isosobid mononitrate is always long acting, can be used as a prophylactic agent. And this one also, it takes minutes. Very good when it comes to hypertensive emergencies. When it comes to route, I've seen nitro can be given sublingually through IV, through topical patches. ICDN or the dinitrate can be used sublingually or orally. Mononitrate can be used orally. But the nitroprusside, it only comes in IV formulation. When it comes to drug class, this one is an organic nitrate. The nitroglycerin, the isosobid dinitrate, and the isosobid mononitrate. These three are organic nitrates, whereas the last one, the nitroprusside, is a direct nitric oxide donor. When it comes to mechanism of action, we know that both of them they release nitric oxide, but these three, the nitroglycerin, the isosobid dinitrate, and the isosobid mononitrate, this one they release nitric oxide after bioactivation, whereas the nitroprusside, this one just releases it directly to the into circulation. It's a nitric oxide donor. When it comes to main vascular effect, the nitroglycerin, it always have a greater venodilation effect than the arterial dilation. Same happens to the isosobid dinitrate and the isosobid mononitrate. But for the nitroprusside, it causes both venodilation and arterial dilation. On the preload effect, both of them, I think all these drugs they play a massive role in decreasing the preload. All these drugs, the nitroglycerin, the isosobid dinitrate, the isosobid mononitrate, and the nitroprusside, both of them, they have got a crucial role when it comes to decreasing the preload. On the afterload, these are three, the nitroglycerin, the isosobid dinitrate, and the isosobid mononitrate, they've got very minimal effect, and they always show an impact only in high doses. Whereas the nitroprusside, it has got an equal action on the preload and afterload. So hypertensive emergencies, this one may be used occasionally, but not so much. This one is not preferred. This one is not used because this one is given prophylactically. This one is the drug of choice. Nitroprusside is a very good drug when it comes to hypertensive emergencies. When it comes to toxicity, the three ones that are somewhat tolerant, but the last one here, this one, it may cause cyanide toxicity. So don't forget, sodium nitroprusside can cause cyanide toxicity. Now, the last class that I'm going to look is a potassium channel openers. This one I've explained. I'm just going to mention some of the drugs. Now, this one, the drugs under this category, they target the potassium channels. Yeah, and remember, when you target the potassium channels, you're going to hyperpolarize the cell membrane. And when you hyperpolarize the cell membrane, what happens? You're going to lead to closure of the voltage-gated L-type calcium channels, because these channels, they always depend on depolarization. So if you decrease the positive channel, these calcium channels are going to close. Yeah. So these drugs, number one, they open the potassium channels, leading to potassium efflux. The potassium efflux will decrease the positive charge, leading to membrane hyperpolarization. The membrane hyperpolarization will lead to the closure of the voltage-gated L-type calcium channels, leading to reduced calcium influx and ultimately vasodilation. So that's how they lead into vasodilation. Then now, drugs that can be used here, number one, the minoxidil, diazoxide. So these two drugs, they're direct acting vasodilators. But I told you guys, they will act by targeting the potassium channel. They are potassium channel openers. The diazoxide is a very big culprit. It also leads to it also inhibits insulin release, leading to hyperglycemia. Don't forget this. Minoxidil is a very good drug when it comes to those clients uh, who 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 have got it's a very good drug in hair growth. Yeah, very good drug in hair growth. And this one is a very unique. This another one called Nicorandil. Very another drug that I just want to mention how it works. So I think I believe I've mentioned the mechanism of action of this drug. Yeah, these drugs, they open potassium channels. When they open the potassium channels, they lead to potassium efflux. Potassium will leave the cell. When potassium leaves the vascular smooth muscle cell, there will be membrane hyperpolarization. The membrane hyperpolarization will lead to a closure of the L-type calcium channels. When there's a closure of L-type calcium channels, there will be a decreased calcium influx. A decreased calcium influx will lead to a decreased intracellular calcium. A decreased intracellular calcium will lead to a decreased myosin light chain kinase activation. That leads to smooth muscle relaxation, which leads to arterial vasodilation and decreased peripheral resistance, which will decrease blood pressure. So that's how these drugs work. They work in this section. They work by let me take my marker pen. So these drugs, they work here. Let me take black. So this drug here, this way they work. They open ATP sensitive potassium channels. They open these channels, and when that occurs, they will finally lead to decrease in blood pressure. They lead to a decrease in blood pressure. So that's something that you have to note when it comes to using this drug. So the last drug is Nicorandil. So Nicorandil is a unique hybrid cardiovascular agent that acts both on the nitric oxide as a nitric oxide donor and an ATP sensitive potassium channel opener, providing a dual mechanism for systemic vasodilation. So this drug, it's also it works. It acts by the nitric oxide donor, and also it acts on potassium channel as a potassium channel opener. So it has got a dual mechanism. So by acting as a nitric oxide donor, it leads to a reduced preload. Yeah, a reduced preload leads to a reduced stroke volume, a reduced cardiac output, and a reduced blood pressure. It also acts on the as a potassium channel opener, which will lead to arterial vasodilation. Arterial vasodilation leads to a decreased peripheral resistance, which will reduce the blood pressure. So that's something that you have to know. So in short, Nicorandil, it reduces both the preload and the afterload. It reduces both the preload and the afterload. So that's something that you have to note when it comes to using the Nicorandil. Wow, it was a long session. Actually, I'm exhausted. I think it's almost 2 hours. I don't know why it has taken that long, but I believe you guys have understood something in this topic. It was a wonderful session. We have looked on the uh, drugs that are used as vasodilators. We have looked on direct acting arterial vasodilators, the likes of hydralazine, the minoxidil, and the diazoxide. We have looked on the drugs that act as calcium channel blockers, the dihydropyridines, the nifedipine, the clevidipine, the amlodipine, the nimodipines. Yeah, we have also looked at drugs that act as nitrates and nitric oxide donors. The nitrates, the likes of nitroglycerin, the isosobid mononitrate, and isosobid dinitrate. We have looked on the nitric oxide donor, the sodium nitroprusside, and you've looked finally on the potassium channel openers, the likes of minoxidil, diazoxide, and also the nicandril. So I believe that being said, thank you guys for your patience. It has been a long session. This is our last episode on hypertension and antihypertensive. So our next video will be on revision, looking at some of the questions, looking on case scenarios, and reacting to some videos that tackle hypertension and high blood pressure. So thank you guys for being patient. If you are new, please like the video and go back and watch our 4 episodes that we tackled when it comes to hypertension and antihypertensive. Thank you guys for your patience. It has been a long journey. I'm exhausted right now. I've got a very dry throat. It was not easy, but I believe that with your support, we can even do more and improve and increase our channel in various social media platforms. So if you've got any question that you want to ask, please write on the comment section. I will react to those questions. And also, if there's something that I've mentioned that looks contradictory, please you can put on the comment section, because we are here to learn and to engage. It's like a discussion, though it's a monologue as I teach, but we can also discuss in our comment section so that you can easily grow in terms of knowledge. Thank you guys for your patience.